Thank you all for tuning in to Outdoor Indoor Texan. Today we're going to be working on a simple recipe and something that we make often in our house, homemade sauerkraut. Now first thing you'll need is a cabbage. In its simplest form, you can essentially make sauerkraut with two ingredients: cabbage, any color you like, and salt. So it's real easy to throw together and a whole lot of fun. Now that we've got our cabbage, the first thing you're going to want to do is take off the first 2 or 3 layers of the cabbage. If you think about it, this is the outer layer that was picked from the farm, transported in a truck, and put out on a display and handled by a bunch of customers at the grocery store. Don't throw these away though. Save 1 or 2 of the bigger leaves, like these 2 here, and wash them and set them aside because we're going to use them later in the recipe. Next up, we're going to prep our cabbage for shredding. Get a knife and cut it into quarters, and make sure to try and cut out as much of that hard, crunchy white center core as you can, because it just won't really translate well when it comes time to actually turning cabbage into sauerkraut. Now that we've got the cabbage quartered and cored, we're going to get to the shredding portion. Essentially what you're aiming for is long, leafy, thin shreds of the cabbage. If you have a mandolin in your kitchen, that'll obviously make this a heck of a lot easier, but I'm opting to use a knife here just to show you all the simplest way of making sauerkraut. Now that we have the cabbage shredded and all the shreds put into a large bowl that's easy to work with, it's time for the second ingredient of the 2-ingredient recipe, which is salt. Now this simple recipe does require some simple math. You need 2% salt to the overall weight of the shredded cabbage. Easiest way of going about that is using a kitchen scale. You can zero out the weight of the bowl, add the cabbage shreds, and then 2% of the cabbage shred weight is what you need in salt. If all that's just way too much math, or you don't have a kitchen scale, the usual rule of thumb is 1 tablespoon of salt per head of cabbage. Either way, once you have your salt, sprinkle it over your shreds. After adding your salt, it's time for a little bit of hard work. The next step will be to crush and bruise the cabbage shreds. You can do this in a variety of ways, either by hand, as you can see here, or using some type of tool for when your hands eventually do get really tired. Regardless of your method, just make sure that all of your shreds have a nice, even beatdown. For those of y'all brand new to this, making sauerkraut is actually a form of pickling, fermentation pickling. Fermentation pickling is one of the oldest methods people have used to preserve and prolong food shelf life. By bruising the cabbage, introducing salt, and then packing it all down into an anaerobic environment, which means a place with no oxygen, we're allowing good bacteria to break down the sugars within the cabbage itself, and effectively preserving the cabbage and turning it into sauerkraut. Other examples of fermentation pickling you may not have known about are Tabasco hot sauce, Worcestershire sauce, and of course, sour kosher pickles. Beyond preserving the food, another great benefit is that the food has that live bacteria in it, which is actually really good for your gut health. Once you've taken all your anger out on the cabbage, let it rest for about 1 to 2 hours. This way the shreds will continue to wilt and the salt will have time to leach out moisture, which is really crucial for your next step. Okay, it's been a little bit over an hour and your cabbage should start to look heavily wilted with lots of moisture at the bottom of the bowl. If you're seeing those signs, it's time to pack it tightly into a jar and get it set up for the fermentation process. I'm using a large food-safe plastic pickle jar that I've washed and sanitized, but you can use a wide variety of containers. The most important thing though is just to make sure that you can get the entire cabbage submerged within its water inside that container. Once everything's transferred into your jar, just pack it all down tightly, which should push the water over the edge of the cabbage. Ultimately, this is what you need for successful fermentation. You need the entire cabbage to be submerged in its liquid. If you're not quite producing enough, just wait a little bit and try again because that salt's still working into the cabbage and should create more moisture. Now you've got the cabbage packed and submerged into your jar. We're going to take that large outer leaf you set aside earlier and place it over the top of your shreds. This will act as a barrier to prevent any shreds from floating to the top and being exposed to oxygen, which ultimately causes rot, and obviously we don't want that. Finally, once you got everything set up and you've got that top layer to keep the shreds from floating, just take a pickling weight or any type of sanitized weight that you can find and place it on top so everything sticks where it's supposed to be. Now it's time for the fermentation process. Take your jar, put it in a dark, room temperature spot within your house, and just let it sit. Check on it every couple of days just to make sure the shreds aren't floating, but for the most part, it should take care of itself. For me, my sauerkraut's usually ready between 1 and 2 weeks, but it's really up to you. The less time it ferments, the crunchier it's going to be. So if you aren't a fan of that snap, just keep it going until you're happy. Flavor does develop though and get more complex over time. So there's a happy medium usually for most where the sour taste starts to sharpen up, but it still has a little bit of that crunch. If it's still making bubbles, it's still fermenting. And that's one of the things about making sauerkraut and fermentation pickling in general that makes it so fun. There are endless ways to tweak the recipe, adding ingredients, changing fermentation times, and they'll all produce something uniquely different and something uniquely yours. So once you've tasted your batch and you're happy with the results, just make sure to take that top barrier leaf off, stick the jar in your fridge, and you've got homemade sauerkraut ready to enjoy. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions about the recipe, leave a comment below and I'd be more than happy to help. If you like what you see, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more great content to come. All right, take care.